and start. And I thank you, Carolyn, for being here as always, and
You're welcome.
making these meetings possible. I really appreciate that. But I want to just make sure everybody knows that this meeting is held pursuant to and in compliance with Albemarle County's continuity of government ordinance, and that the meeting will be recorded, and that recording will be made available. So we're going to go ahead and call to order. So we've got Emily is here, Kate, Nancy, Peggy, and in terms of our members, and we're just waiting for Lonnie, Kenan, and Leah. And welcome our guest. Thank you, Scott, for being here and joining us. And I just want to remind our guest, if you want to contribute, to please let Carolyn know, and she will unmute you so that that can happen. All right. If we could go ahead and review the agenda. Kim, do you mind? Do we need to? If you could show that.
I can put it up. One sec.
I could probably do it if I could.
Sorry, I'm just, Carolyn and I are chatting because there seemed to be a problem with the link, but I think people are getting in now, but we were just getting several messages that people were having trouble getting into the meeting.
Oh, yeah.
So I was trying to help her, but let's see. There's the agenda.
Oh, thank you so much.
Fit a little better.
Thanks, Kim.
Good.
I can do this. I've been waiting, depending on you. You didn't make it so easy.
No, it's fine. I was just trying to also at the same time get people into the meeting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. So I hope everybody has had an opportunity to look at the agenda, and if somebody could move to approve it.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I second it, Peggy.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I hope, is there anybody who is opposed to approving it? All right, so we can go ahead and move forward, I hope, with that. And also, hopefully everybody had a chance to look at the October minutes. And if you all have, there any comments about that, we could take that now. Otherwise, if I could get somebody to approve those minutes, the October minutes.
I approve. I move to approve.
Thank you, Peggy.
And I move to second it.
Thank you, Nancy. All right. And is there anybody who opposes approval of those minutes? All right. Thank you. So I'm going to just start with a follow-up with the important sites. And I wanted to it's just really brief, but I wanted to let everybody know that Devin is working to continue to do some more of his surveying up and down that power line from the Blenheim grasslands, that he's gotten permission to go all the way to Route 20. And so that's exciting that he's doing that. And this also brought up, I went to visited Darden Tow, and there's a power line easement through that as well. So I've been thinking about, as a follow-up to my letter about reduced mowing, the possibility of really looking at that part of Darden Tow might be a great candidate for allowing it to become more of a prairie grassland than just a mowed space. So I wanted to share that thought with you. And in addition, I just want to make sure, Nancy and I were talking earlier about the Natural Heritage Viewer, which is, and I don't know if Leah is able to get in yet, but and for also for Kate, and some of our new members, I want to make sure I send out the link to that because it's a great way to explore, see the important sites, and also be able to link to the county GIS. So I recommend, I will send out all the information so that you can get in with that. And I also want to welcome Liz Palmer. Thank you for joining us today. So great to have you.
Thank you.
All right, great. And so is there anyone else who has had an opportunity to look at any of the important sites or scheduled visits? Anyone else that would like to report about that? All right.
Well, I haven't done anything. Peggy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so moving on, I just wanted to give you guys an update about the Charlotte Humphreys Park and some of the work that we've done with this education initiative. And so Kim and I met with Amy Smith and a community member and looking at opportunities to put some educational material in there because they do have some money available. So some of the things that we looked at was a plants map where you can put some, it's pretty inexpensively, put a QR code on a tree, just label it and then link it to information that we can create or information that's already developed about that particular species. So that's exciting. We're also looking into like a natural playscapes. And I just had a long conversation this afternoon with the person who helps to develop Kids in the Park. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or not, but they create those amazing brochures. There's some now over at over near the
Mint
park
Springs.
near Crozet.
Mint
Thank
Springs.
you. Thank you. And anyhow, I had a great conversation about that. So the possibility of getting that in Charlotte Humphreys. So that's exciting. And hopefully we can talk more in the education subcommittee about that. Does anybody have any questions about that? Oh, and also this possibility of getting some really nice signage around the water retention pond where there's a lot of natives growing in there, and to talk about how you have this native grassland landscape and the biodiversity that one can find there. So that's exciting as well.
Yeah, I think education about wetland areas like that is so important. 'Cause
Yeah.
people don't understand why it's so important to have a buffer of, instead of mowing right to the edge or something, it's how important that area is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a sort of change. Yes.
Did you had reported about the meeting with Amy Smith at our last meeting? Have you had does this mean you've had a follow-up meeting and then more details on signage or what you might do?
Well, I guess you're right, because our meetings are really close. So what I did after our meeting is I gathered a bunch of information. And so I just am sharing that with Amy. And then we have a meeting scheduled on next Friday.
Okay.
So now we have some like numbers about how much it's going to cost to implement some of these ideas.
Wonderful. Okay.
And tomorrow I'm going to actually take a walk in the park with one of the community members who's been really active on the CAC there. So that'll be,
Is that the Kim Swanson?
yes.
Yeah, because I got her to come to some of our meetings, and I had met with her, and she has also some environmental background, but I can't remember what it is at the moment. So I think that's a great person to be working with.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. Maybe I can get her to come, invite her to come to some more of our meetings. Yeah.
Exactly.
But she did mention, and I remember her attending. So that's a great connection. But are there any any other questions about Charlotte Humphreys? Yeah, so it's an exciting opportunity. And in terms of the subcommittees, the education subcommittee met right after our meeting, and we meet on the third Monday of the month. And we created a chart. Well, we have a charter, and we also set up a list of goals that I could show you, but I just wanted to give you that update. And so a lot of the focus area right now is going to be focused on some of that education material for Charlotte Humphreys. But really, I would say the bulk of our meeting focused on setting some goals and the charter. I don't know if Emily or if Leah's here want to comment any further. So we've got Emily, Leah, and Michael, who wasn't able to come, but those are our subcommittee members.
Yeah, Leah is having a little trouble getting in, but I think she has the correct link now. So, but I can pull up the charter if you'd like, Christine.
Oh, that would be great, Kim.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And hopefully it's very simple, right? And I'm hoping that the policy subcommittee perhaps can do the same thing. And I know Kate and Lonnie and Nancy, you guys are on the policy subcommittee. Did you guys come up with a standing meeting date?
We did not, we have not met again. Lonnie has not been in touch with us, and he hasn't sent us any minutes as well. So nothing's happened since our meeting that we reported on last time.
All right. So you can see that we just made a really simple charter for our subcommittee, and then we laid out some initial goals. And so part of it had to do with reviewing the county website and making some recommendations. And also we wanted to try to use the social media outlet in order to inform the public about various topics related to biodiversity. And Leah wrote one about what to do if you find a baby bird that's fallen out of the tree. And also she looked also at like bears in your trash and things that one can do. I wrote one about reducing just letting your leaves be in the fall and the benefits of leaf litter in terms of for wildlife, water retention, soil improvement, et cetera, et cetera. And I did another one. I think that was, yeah, for that. So we've got this list, and I've been working with the people at CAPE to try to get that out there. That hasn't happened yet, but hopefully it will happen. And then, we want to continue to work with Albemarle County Parks and other groups like Blue Ridge Prism to help get those education materials into Charlotte Humphreys and perhaps other county parks. And we want to expand and develop the Park Ambassador Program to help educate and enlist volunteers to help monitor and possibly remove invasive species. And the last one is this sort of more looking at educating county staff in terms of incorporating wildlife habitat protection, corridors, buffers, and sort of beginning that. This is really related to creating these wildlife corridors. In addition, that relates to the wildlife corridors. So anyhow, that's our stab at setting some goals for ourselves, and happy to have any feedback from the rest of the group about some of that. And in addition, I just want to let you know that I've created a folder in our Google Drive file. It says education, and underneath that you can see the education subcommittee agenda and minutes from our meetings, and some of those documents are in there, so to help me follow what we're doing. All right, do you guys have any questions or feedback about that? And if not, I also just want to encourage the policy committee to go ahead and hopefully create a simple charter, and perhaps in your next meeting, set some goals. And then to share.
It's really nice, nicely, a nice list of goals and ideas. It's really well done. That one-page thing you just showed us. Yeah.
Great.
Very good.
Well,
It's
so
got
we
all
can
the
make
good stuff.
headway with it, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to change the world.
Yes, yes.
That's right.
And so that just brings us to looking at the follow-up with meeting with CAPE, and Kim and I had met with Serena, and the great thing is that Kim was able to follow up and really make some headway. So I'm going to pass it over to Kim and let her tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to, and I'll show you all real quick. So as you know, there was not much on our boards and committee page for the Natural Heritage Committee. And there still isn't a whole lot, but at least now I was able to get a few changes in there in the resources section to have the fact sheet, which is essentially the charter, the action plan with all the maps and the biodiversity work group reports, the landowner resources page that Christine created, and the most recent annual report. And then some contacts down here, which this list I realize does not reflect Leah and Lonnie, who are official members as of yesterday, I think, of the board meeting yesterday. So I'll make sure they get added on there. And then some links from here to our natural resources and environmental stewardship pages to kind of tie things together. Also the meeting materials are here, and some of the archives that I had access to. So I can't make direct edits to this. I have to have a web editor do it. And also some of the bigger changes that Christine and I and others have talked about are sort of in the works, and they're going to be a little bit longer term projects. But these things were a bit easier. And so at least we have some of the minor things that we had hoped to have. I hope to have an actual page for the biodiversity action plan also soon.
Yeah, so this was just a great breakthrough, and really getting the ball running on making this, getting the information out there and on the website. So and some of the other changes might take a while, but really hopeful. Like one of the things that we're hoping to get is perhaps in the future, like a landing page that encompasses environmental stewardship, that will link to climate action, waste recycling and composting, and underneath, thank you, Kim, like underneath living here, or actually having a hub. Exactly. So it could be like the county's environmental hub, and from there you can access some of these things much more easily.
I really like that idea.
Yeah.
And so that would help to link up with, how there is a native plants page but that's housed in facilities and environmental services. So if you're searching, it's very hard to find, all of the environmental resources related information in one place. So that will hopefully help with that.
Yeah, so that is really exciting. And the next thing on the agenda, I just wanted to give everybody an update. I had sent the letter out. I don't know if I reported to you guys on this already. I think I might have, about the mowing, the letter about the mowing. Oh, so I already reported about that, but I do want to follow up, and I have yet to do that. So I'm going to make sure that I do. Also, I sent the recommendations off to the Thomas Jefferson Planning. Did I get that right? for the Rivanna corridor plan. So I did send the recommendations off and those were received. And I did attend one of their meetings. There weren't many people there, but it was one that was I believe it was Saturday morning. And I just want to encourage people, they are going to have another meeting in November, and I can send you that information, to go ahead and tune into that. And the Sugar Hollow recommendations, I put that into a letter and I sent that to the Board of Supervisors. And hopefully that was received. I haven't heard anything back on that, but I sent that last week.
You want
And-
me to comment really quick? We did get it, Christine.
Wonderful. Yes, great.
And I have to say, I didn't answer you back. I've been harping
Oh,
on
that's
this
okay.
particular subject for so many years that I was hoping somebody else would harp on it. And our board has certainly heard this multiple times because we've been talking so much about making a parking lot down in there. And I guess you guys already know, just one more thing, that we can't continue right now until they replace the bladder on the dam because they're using the area that we're looking at for a parking lot for staging all the equipment for the bladder on the dam. And that's not, I think, I may be wrong about this, but I think that's going to go through till next fall, if I'm remembering correctly, but don't hold me to that. But it's many months that they have to use that for a staging area. So we had some momentum and then it petered out because of the dam bladder change out. Thank you.
And Liz, thank you for that update. We are also, we'd love to be able to hear more about like any attempts to put signage there or slow traffic down, how to deal with the garbage and protecting that natural area.
Yeah, I wish I could give you something. I think the best thing is exactly what you guys said was we need to cut it off at the dam and have people park down there. One of the problems though, when we do cut it off is people back up down the road and block people's driveways, et cetera, and create havoc for the neighbors. We had the police going down there when we closed it for COVID for those first few months. It's hard to get the police officers down there because they have so much to do, and Sugar Hollow is pretty remote. So we were kind of unsuccessful in getting them to regularly go down there, and they don't seem to want to ticket people. I don't know. I shouldn't be saying that like that, but I know that Ann Malik has complained absolutely bitterly about this for quite some time, and I have, and we have not gotten anywhere. So we figured the best way to do it is really to try to push for a parking lot down there of reasonable size, and have people walk in. And we think that that should cut down on the number of folks that are accessing the place. But I don't know, it's a real problem. And as you all know, it's been getting worse and worse and worse over the last several years. And it's atrocious right now. So wish I had something. I've been unsuccessful to this date.
I was going to say if you had any recommendations for us as a committee to.
I'm sorry. I should have answered that. Keep pushing. We really appreciate the letter. And I just wanted to tell you that we have had the discussions, but we just haven't gotten there because of this, of this work that Rivanna is doing. But you have to keep pushing for it. And it's city land. And see, that's one of the big issues, is it's owned by the city. And, and we've been looking at agreements. So I would be pushing the city too.
Well, that's a good suggestion, because perhaps that should be our next letter.
Yeah, they're the owners.
Right.
And that's one of our issues with trying to work it all out, is get an agreement with everybody so somebody's responsible.
All
And
right.
just so you all know, we did discuss to whom we would suggest addressing that letter in our little subcommittee, and really thought that it should go to the Albemarle board first, simply because we are a subgroup of Albemarle and we wanted to try to not go beyond. So that's why it did go to the Board of Super, or the suggestion to this group was to send it to the board first.
And
But I
that's
agree.
that's good. I mean, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense, Kate.
But I love the idea of then reaching out beyond the board to
Yeah.
the other entities. And
Yeah.
Lonnie and I know Nancy had lots of ideas to kind of help that
Yeah.
along.
And I'm sure your mother has has some opinions here. Anyway, I'll turn myself off now. Sorry.
Thank you, Liz. All right, and that's
Excuse
it.
me.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead,
Just one more
Nancy.
thing on this. NBC News, I think it was last night, had a quick presentation on the bladder, and they were dropping the reservoir down 12 feet. And they did say that it would be fall of 2021 before they were done. So at least that was a potential for more people to know what's going on.
Great. All right, thanks, Nancy. What we're going to do is we have our guest speaker, Bridget Donaldson, who is going to talk to us. Thank you, Bridget, for taking the time to join us this evening. And we're excited. We heard a little bit about wildlife corridors and really excited to hear from you. So thank you so much.
Grace, thanks. I'm excited to be here. Let me turn on one more light. I look a little dark. Okay. All right, let me share my screen. Thank you all for having me. I do like giving presentations, and it's a normal part of my job, but I kept finding myself particularly excited to give this presentation tonight, in part because I know some of you. Emily, Luke, and our friends, longtime friends, and I know Leah from a collaborative we're doing, but also I live here in Albemarle County. And so what we're talking about and with relation to corridors and things like that is really close to my heart. So I'm excited to be here. Okay, do you all see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, good.
Yes, I see it.
Okay. So I'm with the Virginia Transportation Research Council, which is the research division of Virginia Department of Transportation. Our building is actually on O Hill on UVA grounds. And we've got all kinds of, probably 40 research scientists. There's only 2 of us that are environmental research scientists, and I'm one of those. So I do all kinds of different types of environmental research projects for VDOT. But my very favorite one has to do with reducing crashes with wildlife and trying to figure out ways to connect habitat across roads. So I'm going to be talking about just giving kind of a very brief overview of roads and connectivity, and then talk about some research that I've done on I-64 and some of the findings from that, and then what came out of that research with regard to recommendations to VDOT and how we're changing things in VDOT in very positive ways I'm really excited about. And then finally, some considerations for identifying and creating corridors. And I'm going to try to make that particularly relevant to your wonderful, biodiversity action plan, I believe is what it's called. So as you know, and I don't need to get into detail about this because you're all probably well-versed in a lot of fragmentation issues, but roads are a major contributor to habitat fragmentation. And as your action plan already described, first of all, am I saying that right? The biodiversity action plan. Is that right?
Yeah,
Katie?
that's right.
Okay, good, thank you.
That's correct, yes.
Sorry, I have 2 dogs that are probably gonna bark once in a while. So as your action plan already describes, we have interior habitat with higher quality wildlife species that can be fragmented by roads and development and things like that, reducing the size of that interior habitat and increasing the amount of edge habitat. And those edge species are kind of different than the interior species. But regardless, it really reduces kind of the whole quality of habitat that's available for wildlife. And of course, I'm very interested in what species are affected and how species can move across roads, and what species are really isolated from moving across roads. And isolating those populations can really decrease their genetic diversity, leading to local extirpation events and all kinds of bad issues. Of course, the direct mortality is an issue too. So we've got a lot of wildlife that can be very affected by just the number of collisions they have with vehicles. So wildlife crossings, which are either underpasses or overpasses across a road, are really already established for the past 2 to 3 decades as the most effective way to reduce collisions and connect that habitat across roads. So they come in all shapes and sizes. You kind of design them based on your target species. And sometimes you've got like a swath of target species. And underpasses are typically more cost effective and less expensive. Here's some smaller structures. The beauty of these is that we have thousands of these in Virginia alone that weren't necessarily for wildlife, but could be used for wildlife if we do things to enhance their use. And that's what I'll be talking about in a second here. And then these are overpasses, which are just absolutely beautiful. These are in Canada. We have a handful of these now. Most of them are out west. They're increasing in number, especially for those large migratory species, such as elk, that really don't want to go into any kind of constricted underpass, but really like this seamless transition above the road. And they're also very nice to look at. In the US in general, this has really been taking off. So our transportation bill, which provides the funding for probably most of the road projects in the US, the next version, which we'll have an idea about, hopefully it will be out next year, is proposing $250 million for wildlife crash mitigation, especially that type of mitigation that is related to habitat connectivity, which would be wildlife crossings. It also has all kinds of other things about better wildlife crash data. This is huge. It's already passed the Senate. I can't remember if it's passed the House, but we have to wait till next year to find out if it's passing, but we have a really good chance of having that happen. 9 states have also passed wildlife corridor bills. I think you all might have heard of this. I think Misty Bowes might have presented to you. But we have this wildlife corridor action plan that was passed this year. And I was kind of a consultant on creating that legislation just with regard to sharing our research findings from I-64. And this is wonderful. They're in kind of just beginning this process right now, trying to figure out how to create this plan, how to identify wildlife corridors. And VDOT is supposed to be implementing more of these kinds of solutions in the coming years. Not to say that it's going to be something that's going to be all over the state. It's going to be limited in some ways, so we shouldn't just assume that this is something VDOT will be tasked to do everywhere. That is certainly not the case at all. So counties should, like you all, should absolutely take the initiative to do this in your own areas because, like I said, it's probably going to be used just for really large projects. So in Virginia, we really don't have very many wildlife crossings that were specifically designed for wildlife. We've got on Route 17 near the Great Dismal Swamp National Wildlife Refuge, a bridge that spans a wetland that the Fish and Wildlife Service stepped in and said, VDOT, we need to make some dry area for black bear passage and other species passage. And so that's kind of technically called a wildlife crossing because they actually added in some provisions there for wildlife. And then in Fairfax County, there's this really great underpass for deer that we had cameras in, and even though it's in this kind of fragmented semi-urban area, deer use it like crazy. I mean, you can see graffiti right there, but it doesn't matter. Deer and other wildlife use it a lot. Let's see. So on I-64, a lot of VDOT safety engineers realized that there were tons of collisions with deer. They were the most common type of crash really in this area that spans Waynesboro to Charlottesville. And when you look at good data, which you can really only get from the contractors that pick up carcasses on paper forms, which I'll talk about a little bit later, those records are up to 10 times higher than police reported deer crashes. So wildlife crash data obtained by carcass removals is much, much better than what's reported to police, because most people just don't report their crashes with an animal to the police. So they asked us for help to identify some types of mitigation for this segment of road. So like I said before, we know that Virginia has all kinds of underpass structures that are potentially suitable for wildlife, like bridges over rivers, culverts, the size depending on what type of animal you're targeting for use. So we wanted to know, how can we make better use of these existing underpasses? And this isn't a completely new line of research. What's unique about this is looking at isolated underpasses with regard to how far away are they from other underpasses that wildlife will use. So we know when wildlife crossings are designed, they're usually designed in a series. Let me see if I might not have that slide. In a series where they're maybe a half a mile apart and you connect them with fencing. We don't always have that luxury of large underpasses a half mile apart. So what happens when we enhance them just kind of one at a time and piecemeal? Is that worthless, or can we make it effective? So what we know is when we make wildlife crossings, we almost always, when they're designed for wildlife, add fencing to them. That helps the wildlife find the underpass, and it also keeps them from accessing the road. So studies are at a very minimum, usually an 86%. DVC is deer vehicle collision reduction. Same with other species. So they're incredibly effective. So our question was, would the addition of fencing to these isolated underpass structures affect wildlife crashes and increase that habitat connectivity for wildlife? So we chose these two structures that are 5 miles apart between Charlottesville and Crozet, basically. This box culvert is right near the Ivy exit off of 64. And then this is the Meacham River that goes under this underpass at this site too. So 5 miles apart is really too far to accommodate use for both species. We wouldn't want the fencing to go all the way in between both of those areas, because we don't want to cut off movement for species. We really don't want to just fence the whole highway because we want those animals to access habitat. There is a risk of them getting killed, but still it almost feels worse if they are completely isolated and cut off from the other side of the road. So this is another view of these structures. They do happen to be in areas that are somewhat corridors and pretty decent wildlife habitat. The Meacham Bridge is along a riparian corridor. The Meacham River is, a pretty nice river with a long riparian corridor here. So it turns out that these were just good locations for seeing if we could decrease crashes in these areas. And when I'm talking about reducing crashes with deer, I say deer a lot because I'm so focused on trying to sell this to VDOT that I have to bring in the driver safety aspect, which is really important. But things that work for deer also work for loads of other wildlife. So just keep that in mind when I keep saying deer. Not everybody cares about deer, but other wildlife will use what deer will use because they're large structures, and if you design them right, they'll be used by a variety of species. So first we needed to do a pre-fencing study. We couldn't just tell VDOT, spend several $100,000 on fencing and we'll see if it works. We wanted to see if fencing was even justified in the first place. So we put these wildlife cameras, they're kind of like hunting cameras, but now used for a lot of wildlife research. We put those alongside the road and at the underpasses to figure out whether wildlife were using the underpasses and not really getting not having a lot of activity along the road, or whether they were using the underpasses maybe a little, but also using the roadside a ton and getting hit there a ton too. So we put those cameras about exactly 1/10 of a mile apart, up to half a mile on either side of each of those underpasses. So we had a 1 mile segment of cameras because we were predicting that if we were to put up fencing, we would make fencing 1 mile long. And we chose that based on deer's home range is 1 square mile, and other animals probably don't have much longer home ranges than that for terrestrial wildlife species. So we wanted to make it so that we didn't cut off access across the road for smaller species or deer. We wanted every animal that came up to the road to either be able to travel as far as the underpass was, or the fence end, which hopefully they wouldn't choose to go there. So we didn't want to make it too long, and 1 mile was what we decided on. And so we looked at all kinds of things: behavior, numbers, species. Deer were very hesitant to use this box culvert because it's long. It's about 10 feet high, 12 feet wide, very dark. It's like a tunnel. You know, they're prey species and are worried about predators lurking around the corner. So they're hesitant to use it. You can see this buck on the right. That's a hesitancy behavior with his muzzle to the ground, but they did use it. That's a coyote in the bottom right, a fox. We had all kinds of really any terrestrial mammals in the area did make some use of it. So that was good. And there's a bobcat on the bottom right, which are always exciting to see. Under the bridge, this was used a lot more by wildlife. No big surprise there. There was plenty of room for them to roam. You know, it was open, not scary. So coyote on the bottom right, all kinds of wildlife. Black bears used this a lot, where they did not use the box culvert at all. They would approach the box culvert and then just retreat because they didn't like the looks of it, apparently. So they also used the roadside. So even though there was an accessible underpass, they used this roadside like crazy because they lived there. They ate there. I have pictures of them mating there, sleeping there. This is prime habitat for them. They're an edge species. They love fragmented areas. They feed on that early successional vegetation. And they're there looking for places to cross, looking to eat. And other species used that roadside also. Black bears were a different story. This is my favorite picture on this top right with a mama bear and her 3 cubs. They didn't use the roadside for habitat and to live on a daily basis for their needs. They just wanted to cross the road. And so this mama bear is looking for a place to cross. And luckily she made it. I've been tracking carcass removals on this section and this one was fine. All kinds of animals. So no need to really look closely at these figures, but this is really our main summary of results from the fencing or the pre-fencing study. So even though wildlife used this box culvert, the green represents how many used it in that 2-year period. You can tell a lot more used the bridge than the box culvert, and the yellow bars represent the activity on the roadside. And so even though there was less activity on the roadside at the bridge underpass site, the deer crashes here at each site were 8 to 10 per mile in that 1 mile segment that we studied, 8 to 10 per mile per year, which is incredibly high. So even with that access to these underpasses, it does some good, but it does not reduce driver safety risk, and it doesn't completely connect that habitat for wildlife, which was our justification then to say fencing is going to be great, VDOT, it's worth spending the money. It's really only about $200,000 to fence one site for 1 mile of fencing on both sides of the road. That's kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the driver safety benefits. So we installed 1 mile of fencing on both sides a couple years ago now, 8 foot high. We know that that is high enough that deer cannot jump over. On the bottom right are these jump out structures so that a deer that's on the road side of the fence can jump over it. We had different designs that we also experimented with, but we're supposed to design it so that the deer can't jump from the forest side of the fence into the road. So we have this like angled little attachment there. And that was a different piece of our study. So we had the cameras in the very same places before fencing as after fencing for a perfect before versus after fencing study. One site was fenced a full year after the other. So one site we could study for 2 years and one for 3 years. And then we compared all kinds of things. I think I mentioned that in the next slide. We were able to do all kinds of fun comparisons, and we decided the effectiveness by, was there a reduction in deer crashes? And again, I say deer because that's really all that we track. The contractors don't really track the other species of wildlife, despite if I asked them to, I could tell it just wasn't done as much as it is with deer. They get paid more for larger animal carcasses. Whether there was an increase in the use of the underpasses, whether there was a decrease in the activity on the roadside than before fencing. So were animals kind of getting around the fence and still using the roadside? And again, were there an increase in crashes at those fence ends? Those were really important. We didn't want to just have the wildlife go to the fence ends and try to cross there. So it was really exciting, fantastic findings. 92% deer crash reduction. I don't have numbers on other wildlife, but I can really tell you that I'm sure that it was very similar because of how much they started using the underpasses. So these are two different sites. Let's see, the smaller box culvert is in blue. This is the number of years before fencing construction. And then here's the fencing construction, and then these post fencing on the right. So 88% reduction at that bridge site, 96.5 at the culvert site. So that was very exciting. And at the fence ends, there was actually not an increase in deer crashes. There was an increase in deer activity at the fence ends that were open, meaning they weren't tied into like a steep slope or anything that the deer could easily get around. The real ideal situation was tying the fence ends into this short right-of-way fencing. So any primary roads and interstates have right-of-way fencing that is 50 feet off of the road. My dogs are probably gonna bark here soon because my kid's getting home from soccer practice. But if you tie that wildlife fencing into the right-of-way fencing, deer can jump over the right-of-way fencing, but it turns out that they just don't wanna bother to jump over and then jump over again to get around that fence. So that was really effective way to tie in the end of the fence to reduce those circumventions. So the use of the underpass increased by these numbers, which was super exciting to us. Even more wonderful is that the black bears started using the underpasses, the box culvert, which they did not use before. There's now at least a dozen per year crossings by black bear. Actually this year, I think it's probably increased as they're learning where it is, they're using it more. 410% increase by deer in the box culvert. So huge success. So instead of going around the underpass or the fence ends, they're finding the underpass and deciding to use it more because they know they're restricted from crossing the road right there with the fencing. And this is just a graph showing the before fencing here, after fencing here. This is the cumulative use of that box culvert by deer over time. So you can see these slopes are way steeper here. The deer per day are these orange bars. So just an incredible increase in use. So you're really creating that habitat connection by adding that fencing, which is a very simple solution. Oh, and these are some fun videos, if I can. So one exciting thing is that every terrestrial mammal species that use this culvert brought their young through it at one point. So they're teaching them where they are, that they're safe to use, and they would do this over and over. This is just a little fox. We had loads of fox go through here, mostly red fox. You can see by their little black feet. Bobcat, this might be one of my favorites because I just have never seen these in person, but lots of them use this structure and they brought their little kittens through too, which was wonderful to see. Oops, I can't skip this one. This is important. Oh, darn it. Hold on. Okay, and then I have this huge male guy coming through. I think he used this a couple times. This made me really excited. I think this was like the highlight of my month when I saw that. Because like I said, black bears did not use that box culvert before. So this was important to VDOT, the cost savings. If they're gonna spend money on fencing, we need to show that it's worth it. And so we looked at the reductions in property damage, and it's several $1,000s for property damage when you hit a deer. So the average savings per site was over $2 million, which is huge, meaning that we would need less than one deer crash reduction per year per site to offset the cost of the fencing. And we found an 8.5 deer crash reduction per site per year. So there's no doubt that this is worth it with regards to driver safety and cost savings. Real quickly, we've had other research efforts in Virginia. We studied animal detection driver warning systems, where you can put this system along the road that can detect the presence of an animal, and then you can connect it to flashing lights. Someday soon, you'll probably be able to connect it to in-car warning systems and things like that. We found that it does get drivers to slow down. It does reduce wildlife crashes. Other states have found the same thing. So that's going to be on our plate also for using as a reduction method. And then this is a really easy, cheap one. These deer crossing signs, we also place those in the Afton Mountain area on 64, only seasonally and only every other day, so that drivers do not habituate to them. And on nights that those signs were activated, there was a 51% deer crash reduction. So another cheap but pretty effective method. Not as great as connecting the habitat like wildlife crossings, but better than nothing. So because of those findings, this summer has been wonderful with all these VDOT folks agreeing to do these things that I've been trying to convince them to do. We're now creating, let's see, in the VDOT project scoping process. So every project VDOT has to do, they've got this checklist. We're adding a box on that checklist saying, did you consider wildlife crashes in that area? Specifically deer and black bear, because that's really the only data we have right now from police reports. So they're going to have to consider that. And then that will lead them to wildlife crash countermeasures. I'm developing guidelines over the next year for how to create countermeasures, such as the addition of fencing or creating new underpasses for wildlife. The bridge division has agreed to add a section in their bridge design standards on measures to facilitate wildlife movement beneath bridges, such as creating these passages for wildlife instead of having this huge riprap under bridges where any kind of wildlife can't get through. Just create a trail for them, just simple measures with drawings. And then we're pilot testing an app so that maintenance staff who pick up carcass removals can tell what carcass they're picking up. And that will be absolutely huge if VDOT decides to adopt it. And I'm going to sell that as hard as I can so we can get better crash data on a variety of species. And so now I'm going to focus just a little more, and I'm almost done here, but I wanted to really address some of the questions that you all are considering in your incredible action plan for biodiversity. I'm super impressed with this. I wish more counties would do this. You did a wonderful job. I've been reading it over the past couple of days, and I've read it a couple of years ago, but I needed to refresh myself. So in creating wildlife corridors or identifying them, either or, the best way to do it, of course, is knowing what species live there and knowing how wildlife move. This is usually not often, I said often, but usually not available. We know species data kind of for listed species, threatened and endangered species. We have an idea of those, but general terrestrial species, we don't know. We kind of base that based on the type of habitat that you have and how large that habitat is. And so that's really what most states do, is they do models. Just like the biodiversity action plan, you identified important sites or large areas of forested habitat that have diverse landscape characteristics, because you can kind of count on those having a variety of wildlife species. So, and then determining where to connect habitat across a road. And I know I'm focusing on roads. I am biased because I work for VDOT, but there's other important reasons to focus on why just connectivity across roads. And I'm not trying to say you only need to focus on connectivity across roads, but I am saying that there's probably more opportunities for that than anything else. So I made this drawing today. I'm an amazing graphic artist, as you can see. If you want to hire me, that could be a side job. On the left here, we've got these areas of like core important habitat. And in between, we often have grassy areas or farmland, and wildlife really will cross those if we're talking about terrestrial species, not salamanders, but terrestrial wildlife, mammals in particular, they will cross that. So the hard part is when we've got development, huge housing developments, shopping malls, anything like that, that really is hard to recreate those habitat connections. Some neighborhoods are better than others, it depends on the community association, if that's what it is, but you can't, put a corridor across Fashion Square Mall or something like that. You can do land protection, such as conservation easements and things like that, which are absolutely fantastic. They might take more work and effort and more time to get all that land protected, but that's one area. Roads really are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And they're also narrow. It's easy to be able to connect a short segment for wildlife to go across. And so in my view, it's kind of easier pickings than some other things. Not that there should be an either or, but it's a really important area to focus on when we're talking about habitat connectivity. So when we're considering how to connect that habitat across the road, the location is super important. I talked with Leah, who is kind of leading the effort and trying to identify a place for you all to put a wildlife crossing or two. She's working with our statewide Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative, and we're going to support her on that effort and trying to identify the best locations. So one of the first questions, of course, is there good habitat on either side of the road? You guys have kind of figured that out with your important sites that you've identified. Our wildlife hits an issue. Our data really just is not great for that, unfortunately, but we can still get an idea from police reports. What's the current and future land use? You don't want to build a structure if there's going to be a possible McDonald's on the other side in a few years. So is it fairly protected, or is it good enough for now that you can at least count on wildlife using it for a decade in the future? Are there existing underpasses already? So then you do need to start looking at the logistics of things. If you're going to apply for funding and try to get this to work, it's going to be easier for VDOT to buy into it, and it's going to be cheaper for funding if you can identify where these existing underpasses are that are suitable for your target species. And my target species for the I-64 thing was terrestrial mammals, basically. I said deer over and over, but really, like I said, we've got wonderful terrestrial mammals that we want to create those habitat connections for. And just, think about all of those if you can. And there's no reason that you can't have an underpass that can be designed for salamanders and for terrestrial mammals. There's plenty of bridges that are over streams that can provide areas for both. So can you place fencing there? Is it logical on that section of road to have up to a mile of fencing? Or would that fencing, have to cross roads or something? If there's an offshoot of a road, you can't have the fencing going across it. So just look at those kind of logical questions at the sites that you're considering. And then, are there opportunities for new structures in an area? Is 29 going to be widened in 10 years? If so, get on that boat to be like, here's all these structures that we can increase the size of if you're going to add a new lane to 29. They're doing this on areas of 64, and those are really good opportunities. It's not that much money to go from a 5-foot diameter culvert to a small bridge to accommodate wildlife passage. So those are kinds of questions that make logistical sense in terms of funding decisions, and what you won't get as much pushback from. It might be really hard on 29 to convince folks that you can dig up the road, for example, to create a brand new structure. But it might be easier for them to say, we can put fencing on this wonderful bridge that's over a river. And so in your plan, these circles are the generalized extent of important sites, which I just love that you did that, because they do incorporate roads, and it's really easy to see here on 29. Here's a little view of that area near Covesville, this really big circle. And if I zoom in even closer, this was really kind of quickly done, and I have not looked to see what the sizes of these structures are. But you can kind of count on this, whatever the stream is or river that goes under 29, there's probably a bridge there. So it might be worth checking out that bridge. Down here, there's a railroad underpass, and that's not far away. I don't really know how far away, but can we put fencing there to connect both of those structures and to guide wildlife towards those underpasses? It's okay to guide wildlife towards a railroad underpass, in my view. There's usually room on the side. Trains are really not all that crazy fast. Anyways, so that's one kind of way that you can think about this. You just have to, there's no like way or manual exactly to do this. It depends on the area. And you just take advantage of the sites that you have and what you know, what kind of modeling you've done, and you really just go for it. And I think that's about all I have right now. I might have gone over what I plan to do, but if there's time for questions, I'm happy to take any.
This was really great. I just love that fence, and I'm just so encouraged to see how well it's been, you know, how successful it's been, and that you've been able to use some of our work to help you, some of the biodiversity action plan to help inform some of that, or you can use in the future. I work at Monticello, and we just put a similar fence up around Monticello, Esther, to keep deer off the mountaintop. So it's the same fence that's used on 64. Esther, stop this. I let the dog out of the room. Hold on. Sorry.
I'm not the only one with barking dogs.
Esther, yeah.
And Bridget, I remember when you presented to us about 2.5 years ago, and you had just gotten the data, but you hadn't put up the fence yet. So that's wonderful to have this follow-up.
Yay.
And to see that it really worked.
Thank you. I was wondering if any of you would be here again. I enjoyed presenting to you before, and I'm excited to have the after results now.
Do you have deer carcass pickup data on 29? Because that would certainly be helpful data.
Yeah, don't I wish? No, but what I'm going to be putting in the guidelines for VDOT until we have that better data, hopefully someday, is to multiply whatever the police report data says for deer by a factor of 7 to 8. And even 10 in some cases, but I'm trying to be kind of conservative. So there literally are up to 10 more crashes for every deer that's killed, according to the police. Multiply that by 10. And that gets more attention. And I do have a couple papers that if you all decide to do that, you can reference it. And other states have found similar things. So that's something you can use.
Can I ask a quick question about 29? When we had talked about 29 South before, about a wildlife corridor, one of the big issues was that it's not a limited access highway. There's a lot of driveways and roads coming across that. Can you just speak to how you deal with homes and people's property on a road like that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a super logical, good question. And my answer is, we haven't dealt with that yet. This is the first time that we've even done this kind of thing in the state with regard to taking advantage of an existing underpass. It's really site specific. In some cases, you may be able to bend that fence around so that it ends at their driveway, but kind of veers back. You'd have to just go and look at the site. Maybe you could have fencing only on half of the side of the road up until where the next road is. There's no formula that says you have to have it be a full mile or a full half mile. So you just do what you kind of think works, or call me and I can come look at the site with you and tell you if I think it would work. But it's almost that anything is better than nothing. It's often those situations. And yeah, you're not going to probably get a homeowner that's going to be okay with having to gate their driveway so they can open it every time they leave or something like that. Other states have had things like cattle guards that go across a road because a lot of wildlife won't use, I think that's what they're called, those big bars that go on the road. Yeah. So a lot of wildlife won't cross those. So there are some solutions and there's plenty of research out there, but it shouldn't stop you from doing it if unless it's like crazy number of hurdles, but there's ways out there. You know, it's like I said, that we're still learning and it's kind of piecemeal and it's site specific, but you can make it work and you can improve the situation hugely for wildlife.
Bridget, can you just educate me about the people that pick up carcasses? I mean, how do citizens contact them, and how do they find out about carcasses, or do they just patrol? I mean, how does that carcass removal work?
Yeah, great question. So VDOT has a website where if you Google Virginia report a dead animal or something like that, it brings you to the first link of where it'll bring you to a form you can fill out or a phone number you can call. It's like a 1-800 number. And so through that form or phone number, VDOT creates a work order immediately, especially if the animal's in the middle of the road. It's like an emergency situation. And they will dispatch their contract maintenance staff, which is for all interstates, or they're just VDOT maintenance staff for primaries and secondaries. And so that work order is what they use. They have a system for determining how to pick it up. With the pilot app that we're going to develop, I'm just now starting that process. We're going to have contractors for interstates use an app on their own handheld phone to press at every site that's picking up a carcass. They can just press a button saying whether it's a deer, black bear, and then I think we'll have an other drop-down list where they select other species. They can also take a picture of it. So that's going to hugely improve things. And I'm hoping it will also make the process easier for VDOT, because I really want them to expand it beyond the interstates and to all roads ultimately.
What about turtles? Does the fence mess up, you know, because they'll have an ancestral route that they take, and you're not supposed to pick it up. And so do the fences mess them up?
Yeah, so it probably would. So I wouldn't have put that fencing on I-64 if I thought turtles could live crossing that road.
Yeah.
But on smaller roads where they could get across and make it, yeah, absolutely. You would need to create a different design for them. So turtles will go through much smaller culverts, and you can use, you know, drift fencing and things like that. But yeah, if you know that there's some kind of an important turtle population, then you would just accommodate for that situation. But again, on I-64, there ain't no box turtle that's going to survive those many lanes of traffic, unfortunately.
Well, but there are a lot of these country roads there are an awful lot of turtles that are killed on them, as well as, you know, skunks and possums and stuff. So
right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bridget, is that the information, if you wanted to find out how many carcasses get picked up by VDOT, is that available to the public?
So not the carcasses, it's not. Police report data is available, like even through the DMV website, but no, we don't have the number of carcasses picked up, period, really. It's kind of a long story, but we just don't. So that's why I'm doing this study to get an app. Yeah. They kind of track the work orders that they have, but it's a mess. You can't access it in any simple way. Even I can't do it with the access I have within VDOT. So stinky.
Can I ask one more question? I'm not quite sure if I'm allowed to ask questions when I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm going to throw one out. I was surprised by your cost benefit analysis. How long are you expecting the fence to last? Because you didn't mention that in the calculation.
It's awesome. You've got really good, important logistical questions. So 20 years is what we based the life of the fence. I was told by the contractor that he has a fence that's like that for another reason, that's 50 years old and still lasting. But 20 years, and that means that VDOT has to maintain it, and that has to be in any kind of agreement. It's really, at the sites we studied, it was only about $500 per year to maintain it. And maintaining it means that, you know, tons of branches and stuff will fall on it. We had 2 incidents of cars crashing into it. But still, it was only $500 per site per year, which is not really a big deal for VDOT, but that is a consideration. But yeah, we base that on a 20-year lifespan.
Okay, and how much did you say it cost a mile of fencing, VDOT?
The average was, I think it was 270,000. And it varies. We had 2 different contractors with vastly different prices. And I averaged those. One was 150,000 and one was 300,000, something like that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your questions, Liz. And can
And,
I
okay.
go ahead, Nancy?
My question is, do you have other sites along I-64 or other, I-81 that, you're going to be working on with similar fencing now that you see that it's cost effective?
Yeah. So I gave VDOT all kinds of information. I really, really wanted to sell this idea in the Afton Mountain area where, you've got the parks there and there's absolutely no underpasses for like a 7-mile stretch that wildlife can use. So I gave them that information and they're using that to compare, they have a certain budget of money and they either have to figure, are we going to reduce wildlife crashes or are we going to reduce the number of rear end crashes from all those dang trucks that get in the left lane and cause people to slow down. So they have to make those types of decisions. The one I do kind of have hope for is what we're dealing with in our Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative on I-81 near Lexington. There's a Buffalo Creek corridor there that our statewide collaborative has really pushed for trying to get fencing there. There's this beautiful bridge over the river. We could add fencing to it. We went so far as contacting the Rockbridge County because really they have to kind of move it forward. It's for funding decisions, it's often the county or MPO that has to fill out those forms and try to get funding. And so it's kind of stalled with them, but we're gonna revisit that and keep trying. We have to do the handoff at some point, and especially me being with VDOT, we can't apply for those kinds of funds. I could get fired for going as far as I have already, but so there has to be some kind of handoff of, other people need to try to get this stuff pushed forward. And that's what we're trying to figure out in our statewide collaborative is what are the steps we need to do that. And so I'm super excited that you guys and your Albemarle County has gone forward with this already, more than most counties that I've ever heard of doing. So you're taking the right steps. And there are a couple of funding options if anybody wants to contact me later about that.
Yeah, and I would love to just give a little preface of why we're talking about the 29 South Corridor too, because I know, Leah, we had on the agenda to talk about that and the Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative. But just because I'm not sure if everybody, we have new members and Liz is here and there might just be people who aren't aware of the whole situation, but there's a history to the site. And Scott Clark is here also who is familiar with it. And it's actually called out in the Biodiversity Action Plan within the connectivity section as a recommendation to investigate an underpass at that site in the important site at the Southern Albemarle Mountains. And so I had noticed that, and then we received an email, several of us, from David Hanna this summer about a bear crash that he had observed there. And then I had been talking to Misty Bose from Wild Virginia, and she's also involved with the Wildlife Corridor Collaborative. And she told me about this potential demonstration project that they're looking at, which is the I-81 corridor that you're talking about, Bridget, right? And I said, hey, maybe this could be a demonstration project in 29 South, or we could explore thinking about it and looking at it as a potential demonstration project because we have this anecdotal, it seems to be a lot of anecdotal data suggesting that that is a site where there are a lot of crashes and wildlife collisions. So I just wanted to provide that background that sort of sets up the conversation because I don't think that we necessarily got everybody on the same page or communicated about why we're talking about that site in particular. And Scott is also here. I know he has a history of thinking about this and thinking about that area as well.
And I've got,
Leo, you're muted.
Kim, I've got those aerial photos I showed you if anybody wants to see them.
I wanted to take a minute to thank Bridget for the extra work I know she put into the presentation to make this specific to us and specific to the Biodiversity Action Plan. I peppered Bridget with a zillion questions a few days ago, and I threw all this information and all these maps and all this stuff at her, and she just like zoomed in through it and pulled out the most important stuff and put it into her presentation for us. So that was a very short notice and a lot of data to go through. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. That was way more fun than spending hours on my timesheet. So I liked it. I was all right with that.
Yeah, so I know that Scott, if you've had this historical, you have looked at that particular site on 29 and wondering if you had any thoughts you wanted to share with us just from your perspective and history with that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to mention a couple of things. First, thanks, Bridget. That was really interesting. Looking at those fences on 64, thinking, I wonder what's going on here.
Yeah.
And they have the story behind all that, and that was really interesting. 429 South, I've been kind of keeping my eye intermittently on some sites along the road there for probably almost 20 years now, just off and on as I go through there. Because I have this longstanding interest in connectivity and crossing improvement and all of that, and was working for the committee back then. So I'll just share my screen real quick if that's okay, just to show an overview of a couple of these sites I've noticed in the past. I'll try not to take too long. Let me open this up here. There it is. It'll give me all kinds of options. This is the site that started me off wondering about this. To give you an idea, my daughter just turned 18, and I spotted this site when I was driving south with her as a baby in the back of the van. So goes back a while. So this is way down the south end of the county on 29, Cove Creek Industries. And you can see this is one of a few different connections across 29 from those two separate portions of the southwestern mountains, Herds Mountain kind of block of important habitat that's identified in the action plan. And sadly, like Bridget, I've never been lucky enough to see a bobcat alive in the wild. And the only one I've ever seen was the dead one that I saw at this spot. You can see kind of a corridor coming down from a couple of different directions, and there's a creek here that runs into the road. And that is the only place I've ever seen a bobcat anywhere. I was going to say in Albemarle County, but that's anywhere in the wild. Very sadly, was killed at that spot. So that was my first inkling that there was something going on. But that's not the only site. This one across from Fan Mountain and Boaz Road here was just one of the ones I was talking to Kim about. You can so easily see this from the aerial photos that you've got this obvious corridor connection from large forest block to large forest block coming right across the highway there. So they're not that hard to spot, like Bridget said, if you just kind of scan the landscape.
Yeah.
Let's see, this is wing spread. And again, there's a creek, a couple of little connectors coming down between two forest blocks. And this is a presentation from a long time ago, but this is not a real project. This was just a mock-up. But just, you know, we've got an obvious connection here, and then opportunities to enhance buffers in the forested corridors on either side. Trying to hit multiple values for reducing vehicle collisions, increasing habitat connectivity, doing some carbon capture with the tree plantings, It's right on 29, so we could put up a lot of signage. There's just a lot of opportunities to do with this kind of project for education as well as actual improvements. And I think that's the last one. This is right north of Red Hill Road. And every time I see that bear picture that Bridget, you had in your presentation of the mother bear with the cubs, it reminds me of this site because that's exactly what I saw, although they're going a different direction. It almost looks like it could be the same site. It's on this curve. And probably 10 years ago, there was a mother bear with cubs coming across here, again, between these two forest blocks. So that's a difficult place there, but you can easily spot these possible connections, and it's amazing how often that once you spend some time looking at them, you find evidence they're being used. I wish we had the cameras that VDOT's project did, but maybe we'll get there.
Yeah.
So there's several places along 29 South where those kind of connections are possible with underpass improvements and maybe some fencing and some educational signage and all that. There's just a lot that can be done.
Scott, are those places actually have an underpass in place?
Some
right
of them
now?
do, yeah. The one though down by Cove Creek Industries, I think may just be a pipe if I remember right. The one by Fan Mountain, there is a little bridge there. Sorry, I'm getting them confused. The one by Fan Mountain, there is some sort of underpass. I can't remember exactly now, but they're definitely there, but they probably are being used, but they're also probably being skipped a lot because of the difficulty of getting into a small opening.
So
Something we need to survey.
I just want to say one thing, and then I've got to take off for you guys. I just can't remember how long ago it was. The reason why I'm on today is, of course, I want to hear what you guys say, but I also wanted to listen to Bridget's presentation because I hadn't seen it yet. And several years ago, I was involved in a conversation about this area on 29 South and the Wildlife Corps, some kind of passage, and VDOT representative was in the discussion. And it came up that there really wasn't anything that was easy that was going to, wasn't going to cost a huge amount of money. And so I'm really, really curious if you guys know of a place, please let the Board of Supervisors know, because if it is something that can be done, I will be more than happy to try to push on that. Obviously, if it's not rebuilding 29 South, because it's going to be tough to get that done. So anyway, that being said, thank you very, very much. And it's been really interesting. And I'm going to take off. And please let me know the funding too. I'll be emailing Bridget. I'd love very much to find out those funding options. And I'd love to find out in the future, after you get this all done, if communities are going to be able to use revenue sharing money for this. And that's another thing I'm hoping for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Liz.
And Bridget, I know you have to go at 7, and so thank you so much for bringing this to us. And I'm really happy that you and Leah are in communication, because we're going to hear from Leah next about things that she's been doing, and it's very exciting and excited to move forward.
That's awesome. Thanks. I didn't know that we'd have the Board of Supervisors person here. That's pretty awesome. I just want to kind of reiterate that I feel like things are really kind of coming together all at once. And I cannot encourage you enough to keep going on this path, because your biodiversity action plan and the fact that the I-64 stuff was so successful in our county is really huge. And the fact that, Liz was on here and can help move it forward, it's like the most progress that I've seen in our state yet. So keep on this track. And I know Leah's super motivated. I think you all have probably really brilliant minds and could support that effort too. And sometimes it only takes a handful of people to get amazing work done. So please keep doing what you're doing. And I'll help as much as I can. I also have lots of wildlife cameras that I can probably lend out. I might have to get some permission, but even if they say no, I might still sneak them out of my office because they're just sitting there. So yeah, keep me posted. I'd love to be part of this process.
Thank you. Thanks for the encouragement.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bridget. Really great
Yeah,
to
good
see
to see
you.
you,
Thanks for your
Emily.
presentation.
All right, I'm going to take off and I got to pick up my kids from soccer practice. So
All right.
I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye-bye.
All right. Great. All right, Leah, we're excited to hear from you. You've been spearheading this.
I was trying the shortcut for muting and unmuting, and of course it isn't working right. I mean, it is, but my lead finger. Anyway, thank you. Wow, and that, Bridget did a lot of work specifically for us, and that is really, really helpful. And I am so glad that Scott Clark is on and that Kim knows, and various people know different pieces of the 29 South story, because I only knew a tiny bit of it. So originally, Christine had asked me just to update you all or give you a quick overview of what the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative is. Bridget started it a few years ago, and then Misty Bowes from Wild Virginia got involved. So the two have been co-chairing it for a while. I'm not sure, probably at least a year. But the goal of the organization, since Bridget is with VDOT and was focusing on deer crashes or deer collisions with vehicles, because that's what is measurable and also has high property damage costs. This is what the Virginia Safe Wildlife Collaborative, Corridors Collaborative, was focusing on. And I got involved with the collaborative, not knowing that it was focused more on car or vehicle crashes. I assumed it would be more kind of related to habitat and providing habitat-related corridors for wildlife. And then I realized that if, like Bridget said, roads cause one of the biggest fragmentations of habitat, and VDOT maintains roads, and this work that Bridget has been doing recently provides ammunition, you could say, for getting things done. And in the years that I worked in corporate environmental affairs, corporate issues, I learned right away that in able to get anything done, if it wasn't a government regulation where they were going to enforce it, you had to find a business reason why to do it. And of course, in our society, particularly around the Charlottesville area, with people who are very well educated and informed, we want public support for something that can really help move things forward, like affecting the Board of Supervisors. Also, fortunately, we've got champions on the Board of Supervisors. But we want, I think to have success, we need to have multiple aspects that will help move a project forward from different angles. So anyway, so with the Virginia collaborative, state collaborative, we had strategic planning session recently, and I volunteered to get on there so that I could kind of see what was going on and determine, is this collaborative totally really just going to focus on vehicle crashes, or is it going to be move more towards habitat focus? Because Misty Bowes at Wild Virginia is more habitat focused because that's her organization. Anyway, long story short, I volunteered to do a lot of phone calls to a lot of different people across the state. Let me back up. Most of the people that participate in the collaborative represent different government agencies. I don't think there's anybody else at the county level, and Kim's starting to participate in the organization now. But most of it are like state agencies, like not just DCR, but like Virginia Fish and Wildlife. And there's many, many researchers who are working at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute up in Front Royal. So anyway, huge wealth of incredible people with incredible experience and knowledge. Anyway, they decided at the strategic planning meeting to ask people to break into one of two different work groups. One is research, which would look at what research is out there on wildlife corridors. And I can tell you from having talked to a number of the researchers independently or individually that 99% of the research is all modeling. So it's all estimates. And like Bridget said, we don't have good actual data on wildlife populations. We don't know where they really are. And so I've spent a bunch of time in the last couple of weeks calling all kinds of people and emailing all kinds of people, trying to find out if anybody has any data on actual population occurrences on any kind of animals, any kind of wildlife. And so far, I mean, I haven't checked with everybody, but so far the answer is no. So anyway, the other work group through the collaborative is a demonstration project that Bridget mentioned. And that Kim had talked to Bridget about using Highway 29 South. I thought that there was at the demonstration, the first meeting we had at the demonstration work group, there was 2 projects brought up in addition to the US 29. I won't go into the details because I'll take way too much time, but the other 2 projects are very viable and there's already movement on them and or champions that can help move them forward. I assumed we were going to be in competition to have the support of a collaborative work group for competing our project, US 29, wherever it would be along 29, competing with these other 2 projects. And then when I talked to Bridget at length the other day, she said, no, you've got when she learned about the biodiversity action plan and our 2 key members on the board of supervisors, et cetera, and having Kim as a natural resource manager, she realized that we have some power to be able to move something forward. So it was great that on the call a minute ago, she said that the collaborative would support us. We don't know what that looks like yet, but that was good. So, and clearly you could tell she's very impressed with what the expertise that's in this group and the possibilities that we have. And I nod to Kim too, because I'm just so thrilled with everybody we've got. So anyway, that gives you some more of the background. So to summarize, I'm gonna have to look at my notes because otherwise I will go on too long. I looked, one of the people at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute is analyzing the data from the police reports for deer and bear crashes across the state. I contacted him. He gave me access to information in our county. So far, it's just what he sent me was just for the main highways. And he's going to later get me detail for the county roads because, like Peggy was saying, what about animals like box turtles, which I just read recently, are really, really, really being threatened a lot. Their populations have really declined. It's all a learning curve. So I want to look at even more rural areas and not just big roads. But anyway, looking at that collision data, and I started looking just around the Red Hill area because of the information that Kim described earlier. But then I noticed that there were points all along 29 South, all the way down to Faber, which is at the bottom of the county line. And Tom Olivier, who's one of the many people I called trying to find out if we have any population data, he mentioned that Scott Clark had seen some rare mammal, he couldn't remember what, so now I know it was a bobcat, down more towards the southern part of the state. And so then I started thinking, okay, the more I got into all this, it was like, okay, there's crashes everywhere. It's all along kind of US 29. There are river crossings at several places. Up around Red Hill, it's the North Fork of the Hardware River, close to where Scott was talking about in Covesville, I think just north of Covesville area is the South Fork of the Hardware River. And then south of Covesville, there's a Hickory Creek that's right kind of like where the cutoff is for Faber, which is State Road 6. I'm looking at all this stuff on the maps. So all of them are potential places. I looked at the BAP maps. I looked at the conservation focus areas. That whole southern area from Red Hill down to Faber is part of the conservation focus area related to the Southern Albemarle Mountains in the BAP. And there are important sites close to Red Hill and close to Covesville and close to Faber. But then the question is, which of the important sites are relevant to wildlife that might be crossing the road, and how far are those important sites? If they're 5 miles away, it's probably irrelevant. If they're half a mile away, they might be relevant, and none of them look half a mile away. I looked at what the BAP had projected for corridors moving wildlife from the Southern Albemarle Mountains. And on the BAP map, it did not show anything going east to west. Everything just went south to north. So that didn't help, but you can look, like Scott was saying, by looking at the aerial photos, You can even look at the BAP maps and you can see where the forested areas are. You can see those bigger forested areas down closer to Faber, but it looked like the forest comes closer to US 29 by Scottsville. So, you know, there's all these trade-offs. They're all worth looking at. And Bridget said that once we knew what areas we wanted her to look at, where there are which rivers, and I would say North Hardware, South Hardware, and maybe Hickory Creek potentially, she would actually pull up DOT map, which she actually incorporated a little bit into her presentation today, and she would figure out what culverts or bridges were there and how wide they are and get more information on them. So she can do that for us. And she was impressed, Kim, that you had access to the to the state DOT proposed road construction information. She didn't know about that. So I'm so thankful that you have that. And I'm hoping that you could, as you saw in an email to you, I'm hoping that you could look through that and see what projects DOT might have coming up along that 29 area in the next few years, because, you know, not only obviously, but Bridget has pointed out that if you can time things when construction is already going to occur, it's going to be a lot less expensive, and therefore we can get things, we have a higher chance of success. So, okay, so let me check my notes. Okay, so
that's public, that VDOT site is a public site. It's the 6-year improvement projects. So you can search it by localities. You can just search by Albemarle and find out every road project that VDOT has planned in the next 6 years. So it's not like a special access, anyone can access it, but I'm happy to do that too. It won't take long.
Oh, great. And I'm sorry, I'm like, blah. Anybody have any questions or anything you want to say yet? Yeah, Nancy?
Yes, I do. I had written to Mr. Booth about this issue in Southern Albemarle of 29, maybe, I don't know, more than a year ago as a letter from the chair. And she just said, no, they had all the projects they wanted and they weren't interested. They'd get back to me in 22. Lonnie dove into our corridors and our maps at a closer level, and we did identify a spot on 29 where we really thought was a good crossing point. I just can't remember it exactly to describe it to you, but I suspect that Lonnie would, and so I will look at my notes on that and try to get back to you about that.
That would be great. I'm making a note. Oh, great. That'd be really helpful. Okay, so in processing all this information, talking to a lot of people, a thought occurred to me, which is, what kind of wildlife are we actually talking about? What, you know, we talk about the Wildlife Collaborative, the state one, and it's all deer and bear because that's the only data they've got access to. But what do we really want to protect? So I thought about this in the context of the BAP and also in terms of the context of what can we, like, do we focus on like terrestrial mammals that are visible to people, that people can, the public can identify with, and therefore we can get more support for, you know, get more, it's easier for people to say, oh, I want to support a crossing for a bear over dragonflies. You know, or one species of bird that nobody's ever heard of and they don't know what it is or how to identify it out in the field. So do you want to look at visible or interesting wildlife? Do you want to look at rare plant communities and the organisms associated with them? Because in talking with Devin at length, I mean, we all know about ecosystems, but in terms of corridors, do we want to identify the animal first? Do we want to identify that native plant community that then creates that fern shade web and creates the ecology of that area that supports the wildlife that live in that piece of habitat? Yeah, Scott, you want to say something?
Yep. Sorry, I unmuted myself just in time for the cat to be allowed. I think probably one way to look at that choice for a crossing like this is to look for species that have large home ranges. So bears, bobcats, skunks, believe it or not. I'm sure there's plenty of research out there that would tell us, 5 or 6 fairly charismatic animal species, and I'm a weirdo who likes skunks, and I realize not everybody feels the same way, but there's probably a fair number of species that we know are in that area that have large home ranges, because we're focusing on connecting 2 parts of a really large block. So it seems like it's the really area sensitive species or large home range species that we could focus on. But that's also going to get us some things that'll be fairly attractive for educational purposes.
Yeah, and I would add also, Bridget mentioned this, that there's often an emphasis on deer collisions because they're dangerous and they're costly. And if we choose to seek grant funding for this project, which I think is, if it were to move forward, would be a high likelihood, that we may need to focus on that. And a lot of other wildlife will go along with those, large mammals that have big habitats.
Right, and agreed almost completely. And I only have the caveat is I asked Bridget if deer could be considered indicator species for like where they would cross. And she said, absolutely not, because they'll cross just about anywhere. Whereas certain other species, and Scott probably knows more than I do, he's nodding his head, and Kim probably knows too. Other species will cross based on the habitat that's there. Deer edge species, they don't care as much. So like culvert used by deer may not be used by other wildlife. So it just gets complicated. So I went, okay, so what are the priorities? How do you narrow all this down? And then I thought about, well, wait, our mission is diversity. I mean, that's the focus, is increasing and preserving diversity. So maybe another way to look at this is how, if we look at where we want to do a crossing and we want to do a road crossing, we look at how are we preserving the most diversity, which might be the most variety of wildlife that would cross. And wildlife might include birds as well, which I know about and I think about with wildlife quarters, but I don't think about in terms of roads. But I actually, I can't remember, somewhere in all the webinars I've been attending recently, I heard a presentation by somebody who said they did an experiment by taking, I think it was one of the SCBI, the Smithsonian researchers. Somebody did an experiment by taking some birds on a boat. It was like a regular bird that we would think would fly pretty long distances. They took them out on a boat out on the water, and the birds would not fly like 1,000 yards to go to land. They just wouldn't do it because it was over open water, and I guess, it wasn't habitat connectivity, kind of, in a way. So there's just so much in this field and so many things to be considered. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a kind of a caveat. I think before we do huge amounts of work, we probably need to figure out, are we want to tackling this thing from the perspective of DOT funding or large terrestrial mammals or diversity?
Yeah, I think, sorry, Christine, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think you have to follow the funding, that's such a big piece of it. And just to make it a reality, like the place where the overpass exists, the largest forest blocks that you can connect. And then I hadn't even thought about this, but this idea of how many driveways you have to cross, and what is the adjacent landowner going to think about an 8-foot fence? So that was one of my questions, like, where's, I know the place on 64, those are big forested areas, but I wondered what the landowners thought about that fencing. So
Right.
I could see how that could be a stumbling block. So thinking about like the fewest number of driveways you would have to cross over. And I don't know, I think taking those considerations, and we just have to, because otherwise if the funding's not there, it's not going to happen.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Christine. I was thinking about, what Bridget was saying about this 50-foot right-of-way fencing around the interstate, right? That there was that, I don't know I don't know if anybody here knows, but like, what is the right of way on 29? It might be different than on 64 or something, but clearly there must be some right of way. I don't know if people's properties actually go all the way to the road. They shouldn't, right? There should be a right of way
Yeah,
in which the fence could be put, I would think. The driveway crossing is, yeah, that's a whole nother issue. But I think in terms of putting fencing, people may not like to look at it if it's obvious to them. But like, I think that VDOT probably has the actual right to put in that fencing. I don't think that we're going to be butting heads with landowners over the actual right to do so, I would think.
But we also don't want to get into a big controversy, you know, in a big fight with landowners, and, you know, if they don't like the way it looks.
well, maybe that's another reason to focus on like kind of the large terrestrial mammals or animals that people can identify with and would be interested in. And in terms of the roads, Christine, since Bridget had mentioned to me about the fencing along roads, which I hadn't thought about till 2 days ago, if we look at the Red Hill intersection, Red Hill Road's crossing the interstate. That's a big road. You can't fence that off. Down at Faber, it's State Road 6 right there. You can't fence that off. And so the South Hardware River, I don't want to take the time necessarily to share my screen, but if you look at the map, or I take it back, if you even just go to Google Maps and you poke around Codesville, if you look for the South Hardware River, I think I've got it right. Where the South Hardware River crosses, there's no major road in Google Map. I didn't see any road in Google Map right there. There's probably driveways or something, but you could fence those off. You can't fence off Red Hill Road. So that dictates. And South Hardware River is also one of the two areas in the BAP for the corridor connection from east to west. It's just along the South Hardware Fork and along the North Fork of the Hardware and the South Fork. So the North Fork it's at one of the, there's a big road there. I don't know if it's Red Hill. It might be Red Hill or Plank Road. Okay, so anyway, so that, that might be an area, but then the question is, other than deer, are there bear in that area? Do bobcat move through that area? It would be helpful if we could find any occurrence data. There's all kinds of general data about habitat, but anyway, I'm done. I'm like,
well, most people, I think you could get the data on the wildlife if you identify the area where the forest comes very close to the road on both sides. That was a place that Lonnie thought was connectivity, because you put out the trail cams. I mean, I put out a trail cam at my property, and I'm in the a residential area, and I got a bobcat on my property. So, because, you just put the cameras out there. And I think people always are fascinated, certainly when I share this with the neighbors, they're fascinated. So I think you could easily get permission to put some of these cameras out and find out if that was a good area or not.
And like Emily said, a lot of it may be in the right of way as well, where VDOT already has access. But Leah and I are likely going to have a discussion about this really soon, to talk about, a lot of the work that she's done and what the next steps are. And also, we didn't mention that for this potential demonstration project, the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative has asked me to come and talk about this site. And so I'm kind of Leah is really doing the work, but I'm trying to gather on, I'll help, pull it all together into something we can present to them. And so if anybody else wants to help out with that effort or be involved, we can figure out, how to meet and what the next steps are in moving it forward, before we get too far down into the weeds about the specific details.
When is it that you're going to present?
I think, is it in January, Leah? the next meeting?
Well, and I have to apologize. I didn't see that message from you earlier asking about this. And thanks, Christine, for sending it to me. I am still relearning so much stuff between getting a new laptop and my email program change where it does everything on threads. And if two people send emails in the same, before the time I checked it and I check it again, I don't see the multiples. I only see the most recent one, even if it was 10 seconds before the other. So they just don't show up at all. So anyway, the next official meeting of the demonstration group is not till January, but that's because they wanted the people that have the potential demonstration projects to put together some information and then do a presentation about their site. One of the sites is down in elk country where the elk have been reintroduced down in Southwest Virginia. There is a big road that has been under construction for a while to go into the Kentucky coal fields. And so its nickname is the Coal Highway. So it is a highway. It is just for the purpose of connecting the Kentucky coal fields. And the elk, this is elk habitat. I mean, I've seen presentations where they've radio collared the elk, and that is exactly where they hang out, and they don't really go very far from there. They're going to get slaughtered when the trucks start flying through there. So, oh, and then a biologist with the Division of Wildlife Resources decided at that last meeting, I mentioned the first meeting of the demonstration group, she said, I'll be happy to champion that project and I'll check and see what the status is and we can put pressure on DOT. And whereas just 3 months before at a previous presentation about this, it was said there's no way DOT is going to spend any money because the project's too far along. So, you know, it all depends. That's why I'm like, you know, we got to have the right levels of support to get things through.
Right. And I just one more point on that is, so Bridget had mentioned the funding, the federal funding and the grant, there's potential grant opportunities. And so, you know, I had mentioned this site to Misty because it seemed like a great opportunity, just given that they were looking for demonstration sites that, you know, I thought maybe they would, you know, be interested in this area. But when in talking with Bridget, she also mentioned that even if that didn't come about, that, you know, there's a point to doing all of this work anyway, because there's all of these potential grant opportunities, especially coming down the pike for future work as well. So it might lead elsewhere. We just don't know at this point.
Well, I personally think there's opportunities in the Charlottesville area for, or I should say in our county, for private funding as well, because I cannot believe since I started working on this concept 8 months ago or whatever that, no, I guess it's been longer than that now because of COVID. There's so much talk, there's so much focus, there's so much work, there's so much interest in wildlife corridors right now. And if we're talking about either wildlife crashes, which people can identify with, or a bear or bobcat that people get interested or excited about, I think we can get some private funding as well.
Well, Scott, did you have a question or you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a suggestion. It's really hard with lots of projects in a discussion meeting like this to kind of wrap your head around all the complexities of figuring out where to go. And Leah mentioned some, you know, what are their priorities and things like that. It seems like it might be a good time to lay out a fairly simple but you know, agreed upon selection process. And one part of the, like Leah said, is show your priorities. I think we also need to do some sort of quick field survey of the existing crossings, because that'll start getting to Christine's question about funding. Because if you look at them and you see this one's easy to fix, or this one's already a bridge that has a stream bank under it versus this one's just a pipe, you can narrow down your choices pretty quickly by, you know, just looking at seeing which ones are easy to work with and which ones are hard, and picking, you know, where do we have an overlap between a good connection point and a relatively easy, not too expensive conversion. The other thing is everybody's really concerned about fencing, and just remember, you know, fencing doesn't have to be done the same way. The 64 project, they've got a big, wide, uninterrupted right-of-way where they can do that kind of linear fencing for a long distance. That doesn't mean every project is going to do it that way. And you can do shorter fencing that's even farther back from the road. It's more of a funnel. So if you've got a, say, an easement property that's 50 yards back from 29, and you can do a funnel fence that comes down into a corridor and then goes under a bridge, the fence doesn't even have to be by the road if it's catching the animals farther upstream. So there's lots of different ways to do it that I'm sure there are scientists out there who can tell us how to, with a little looking. So we don't, don't get hung up on the details yet. There's lots of options.
So Scott, sounds like you're willing to work with us on this.
Yeah.
Yay!
With all your extra time. That'd be great. That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to be conscious of the time because it is 7:30 and Carolyn's been our wonderful host. And so we want to make sure that we end our meeting on time. So perhaps, Leah, you can keep us informed. We can keep this conversation going. And, when you do have your meeting, you have to be conscientious about the number of Natural Heritage Committee members meeting at the same time, but making sure that we stay within that under 3. And then, but once we've done that, then the meetings can happen unless we make it a public meeting, which can be a little bit more difficult. But it's been really productive and really exciting to be part of this. And Leah, thank you for all the work you've done to champion and this work. And Scott, it's great to have your perspective and to have you join our meeting today. So
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
yeah, really excited
Anybody
about
else?
moving
Sorry.
forward.
Go ahead. I was
Thanks,
gonna say,
Christine.
if anybody else wants to work on it, just let Leah and I know, so I have a sense of how many that might be if we need to have a bigger meeting, or if we can just meet on, on the side, like Christine said.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for a great meeting. And thank you, Carolyn. Thanks to our guests. We've got Jeremy Johnson. Thank you for sticking with us. And you guys all have a great evening.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Good
Bye.
night.